Welcome to System and Soul, the podcast focused on the human energy that runs your business. I'm Chris White, along with my co-host,
Benj Miller.
All right, you guys ready? Here we go. Jake, drop that beat.
3, 2, 1.
Here we go!
Friends, welcome back to System and Soul. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a little while, ever since I met Kris at a coffee shop in Nashville. We met up, we had a really cool conversation and stayed connected since. And he wrote a book that I think we can all relate to called Overcoming the Impostor. And so, Kris, I am so honored to have you here hang out. Kris Kelso has had multiple entrepreneurial successes, and now he is an executive coach and travels the world as a keynote speaker. So super cool to have you here. Kris, what's going on?
Thank you, Benj. I am so glad to be here, man. And I have also been looking forward to this conversation ever since you and I first talked. Just enjoyed spending time with you and love it every time our paths cross.
Yeah, it felt like old friends. So here we are again. We just get to hang out and let other people listen in.
That's right.
So as you know, I teed you up. We always start with what is one thing that is ungoogleable about Kris?
Okay. I don't think this is on Google because it predates most of the internet. But in the early 90s, before I moved to Nashville, in fact, while I was still in high school, I was a DJ on a Christian radio station that covered all of Central Florida back in the early 90s, WCIE out of Lakeland.
All right. What was your name?
Well, the interesting thing, I was just Kris Kelso. People said that's a great radio name. You just go with it. And so I didn't have a special name. And some people thought that was a radio name or something, but it just happens to be my name.
Nice.
One of the most interesting things that happened to me though, Benj, was I was at a mall once, and I didn't, being in radio, you don't get recognized by your face most of the time, unless you're, really super famous. But I was at a mall and I was buying something. I was checking out at a store, and I spoke to the cashier, and all of a sudden her eyes popped open and she went, "Are you Kris Kelso?" She recognized my voice.
That's
and
amazing.
She was like, "You're Kris Kelso." And I was like, I was totally thrown off because I did not expect that. That kind of thing just didn't happen. So it was kind of funny that, I wasn't recognizable by face, but I was by voice for some people.
That's really cool. She must have had like an impeccable ear or something too.
I guess. Yeah. Or she was just really faithful listener, because it obviously struck a chord when she heard my voice.
That's super cool. All right. So obviously you have this. Tell us, give us a little background on why you wrote this book. And then I'll let you take over whatever's on your mind today.
Well, as you mentioned, Benj, I've been an entrepreneur a couple of times. I mean, I've been an entrepreneur most of my career, but I founded 2 different companies. And for a lot of that time running 2 businesses, I struggled with the feeling that I wasn't qualified to be doing what I was doing, or that, that I was worried about people figuring out that I really didn't have it all together, and I didn't have all the answers. And I didn't know it then, but have since learned about this thing called imposter syndrome, which a lot of people experience. And it turns out it tends to be more prevalent among high achievers. So it's something that entrepreneurial, innovative, creative, ambitious types run into a lot, but it wasn't talked about that much, at least not when I was running my companies. And so, first of all, just learning about it was a huge relief. Just realizing that, this is a thing that lots of other people experience it. I'm not the only one. It really helped me. But then when I started to talk about it with other people, with other entrepreneurs, with my clients, and even speaking, sort of incorporating it in some of the speaking events I was doing, the response that I would get from people really just let me know that I had struck a nerve. There's one in particular. The first time I ever spoke about imposter syndrome, like that was the topic. And I think I gave a 15-minute talk at a leadership summit. And this guy came up to me, a guy I had known for years and who I knew was a successful business owner. he walked up to me and said, "You changed my life today. The
Mm.
whole reason I was here was I needed to hear that. I felt like you were just talking to me in the back of the room. Thank you so much." And I just knew that I had struck a nerve and that this was something that uh, impacted a lot of people, but wasn't understood well enough. And so I needed to write something about it. And in fact, I'm a guy, Benj, who likes to read and recommend a lot of books. I'm always
Yeah.
with my clients. Oh, you need some finance help? Here's a good small business finance book. Or you're trying to figure out marketing strategy. Here's a great marketing book. And I hunted for a book on imposter syndrome that was written to and for and about entrepreneurs in particular. And I just couldn't find one. And so
Yeah.
it really became a compulsion that I felt like this book needs to exist and it doesn't. So I guess I have to write it.
Yep. I know that feeling, that burden, that call. So, all right. So the top 3 things that are on your mind, I promised I'd let you take over, but I have one burning question. So I'm going to ask it first.
Yeah.
This is, so, you know, the expression, fake it till you make it, right?
Yes.
Here, my question is that good advice? Because I've been given that advice. I've given that advice for a long, long time. And I heard somebody the other day, somewhere on LinkedIn Universe or somewhere, say how bad that advice is because we teach ourselves that we are faking it. And when we do arrive, we end up with imposter syndrome. Are those connected
We end up
to you?
feeling like a fraud. Yeah. So there's a lot of people feel differently about that phrase and whether it's good or bad. Personally, I do not like the phrase "fake it till you make it" because I think there is sort of an inherent deception there that is unhealthy. That if you are faking it, if you're pretending to be something you're truly not, in hopes of getting there, then that can get you into trouble.
Yeah.
But what I talk about more in my book is this idea of humble confidence, where you don't have to believe that you have all the answers, but you can have the confidence that you have the capability to go figure out the answers. And really, that getting comfortable with the idea that I don't have to be the expert to have enough credibility to start to do something and to explore and experiment and learn my way into success. That approach of, hey, this is new for me and I'm willing to admit that, but I'm also very confident that I'm going to figure this out and that I can be successful. And that's a mindset shift that I think you have to adopt in order to try new things without getting yourself into trouble by faking it.
I like that. One of the ways that in my mind I liked that phrase, so I'm going to have to find a new phrase, but it was less about what you're talking about and more about like how Dr. Benjamin Hardy says, like, if you want to start to become this future version of yourself that you're idealizing is a better version of yourself, just make the decisions that they would make. Like you can choose to do that today. What decisions would that person make? That I think about that all the time. And in my mind, I've gone, well, that's faking it till I make it, but it's not faking it. It's doing it. Do it till you make it.
It is doing
maybe
it.
is a better.
Yeah, I think it is.
Practice until you make it.
A guy that I know named Jeff Goins, who's been a very successful writer, he wrote a book. One of his first books is called "You Are a Writer," and it stemmed from this conversation he had with a friend, where his friend said, "Hey, Jeff, I think he was asking him what he wanted to be or what he wanted to do, and he was hemming and hawing. He said, "Well, I think you would like to be a writer." And Jeff was kind of like, "Yeah, maybe one day." And his friend said, "Jeff, you are a writer. You just need to write. Like you are, the moment you start writing, you're a writer. Just do it." Right.
Yeah.
And I'm now on faculty with an ICF, International Coaching Federation, approved and accredited coaching school. And I teach coaching, leadership coaching. And one of the things I love about our approach to teaching is that we say that you don't really learn it. You're not ever going to learn this from a book and a class and a teacher and from examples. You learn it by doing it. Yeah. So we have a lot of practicum. And our founder of the school is often quoted as saying, the real learning of anything starts when you begin doing it. And so that's my alternative. And I hear you saying the same thing. Of the alternative to fake it till you make it is decide to be it and then start practicing it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you may not be the expert, you may not be the guru, you may not be at the pinnacle of your skill level yet, but you are the thing you want to be as soon as you start doing the work and you're on a path toward expertise. You may not be that expert yet, but you're on your way there, and you just have to get on the path and start moving.
That's so good. I feel like we could end the podcast here and somebody could go change their life right now. Like
Yes.
that's it. That's all they need to hear. Bye. Go do the work. If that's you, just
turn it off and go do
Yep.
the thing you've been avoiding doing because
Yep.
you just need to get doing it.
There's nothing else for you here. All right. So what's on your mind, Kris? What are we talking about today?
Man, what's on my mind? There's been a lot. This has been a fantastic year. A lot of things going on, but I think the thing that I'm thinking about right now, and I know we could have an interesting conversation about this, is the idea of building community. And this is something I touch on in my book. And I'm not saying this just to try to promote some aspect of my book. It's really, I talk about in my book the importance of being a part of a healthy community. And what I'm working on personally right now is how do I build a community? Like I've been a part of lots of other communities that are great and healthy and helpful. And I want to start to be able to create that for people who don't have it, rather than having to, similar to the way I wrote a book because it felt like I didn't have one to refer. There are some people for whom the right community doesn't exist, and I want to create that. And so I'm in the sort of ideation phase and beginning to talk to people and work with people on how do you really build and foster a healthy community.
So as you're processing this, do you have a working definition of what healthy looks like?
Yes, I do. I have a pretty clear picture of what I think constitutes a healthy community. And it starts, number one, with vulnerability. I think that if a community does not have vulnerability, then it's going to actually work against you rather than for you. And let me explain what I mean by that, because this does tie into the book about overcoming the imposter. One of the things that I learned and realized is that when you go into a community like an entrepreneurship group or a mastermind organization, or even just some kind of networking group, in a trade group, whatever it is, if you're in a group of people where everybody's got their game face on, everybody is showing the very best version of themselves, everybody's in sales mode, and they're all kind of pitching one another on, everything's great, it's awesome, I'm doing amazing. You're going to feel very alone there because you know that everything's not amazing in your world, that you don't have it all together. And so you feel both obligated to fake it till you make it. And also you feel a little bit intimidated by the fact that you might think you're the only one there faking it. And everybody else really does seem to have it all together. And so I have really learned that community, without that vulnerability, community can work against you and can feed your imposter syndrome. It can feed that inner critic that's telling you, see, all these people, they've got it all together and they know what they're doing, and you don't. You're just scrambling to try to figure it out. But on the flip side, a community that has where vulnerability is not only allowed, but it's embraced and encouraged and celebrated, that's a place where it will actually kill your imposter syndrome. Because when you voice a fear or a worry, other people can jump in and say, I've struggled with that too. Or, well, that's not my insecurity, but here's mine. And maybe if I help you with yours, you can help me with mine, and we can be in this together. And yes, I've battled that at the same time. And you start to realize that the fears and insecurities you have are often very common and things that lots of other people have faced and beaten before you, and that lots of people are facing alongside you today. So that's, I think, the number one criteria for me for a healthy community is that there's a culture of honesty and vulnerability that allows people to just take the armor off, as Brene Brown would say, take the masks off and just be real.
Hey leader, did you know there's 261 business days in a year? And statistically, most business leaders are balancing about that many opportunities, issues, problems, bouncing around in their head at one time. So we created the261.com. Go there, put your email in, and we're going to organize all those things and send you one daily email that's about this long. It's going to take you about 5 seconds to read, but it's going to remind you of that thing that you need to remember, that thing you need to do or schedule as a leader to be who you want to be. Go check it out, sign up, follow along, see you there. Yeah, the two things come to mind. One is just how well you demonstrate this. Like, I mean, just we got on here, we haven't talked in weeks or a month or whatever, and immediately I start blabbing my insecurities to you of like all my problems of what I'm trying to figure out today and the rest of my day. That's a credit to you and your spirit and the way that you demonstrate what you're just talking about. And then I was just remembering as you said that there's a phrase that's often used about strong communities, about the sharing and there's a phrase, I'm missing it, but the sharing and receiving of needs, and within community. And I think my mind typically goes to like this socialist, like, well, my kid needs shoes, so you need to buy the shoes. But what I hear you saying is that is critical, and it has way more to do about what's going on inside of ourselves, those needs, exposing those needs more than physical needs.
Well, I think those external needs can be almost a byproduct. If you can get healthy around, I'm willing to share the emotional side, the fear side, the internal struggles that I'm having. Then when I need help with a referral for someone who can help me with this or that, or I need you to jump on a call and help me work through some sort of technical problem, and you're willing to do, I think we're a lot more willing and able to meet those external needs when we can get honest about the more internal and deeper felt needs that we wrestle with.
Yeah, it's honoring to let people, like, I feel honored when I get the opportunity to support somebody in their vulnerability. Right?
Yes.
So we forget that. We think we're being a burden. And that's probably, just to your point, I think, those people that we've been honored to be able to help in this emotional context, to jump in on a physical, it's almost like a no-brainer, like you're saying, but it's because we have this now, like we're invested almost.
Yes. When you've built real relationship and you sort of have a shared humanity, if you will, the external needs are easy to jump in and help with, because it doesn't feel transactional. It feels relational.
Yeah.
Right. And when you're in relationship with someone, you're not worried about so much, am I getting more out of this than you are, or are we even, or whatever. That's the transactional side. That's when you're keeping count and you're looking at the dollars or the time spent or whatever. But if you're in a true relationship with someone where you care about one another, and it doesn't have to be romantic or sappy or even a family relationship, but just even in a business relationship, if you genuinely care about each other as humans, then the transactional stuff is a lot easier to just deal with and not worry about so much.
Yeah. That's perfect. Love it. Healthy community, number one. What's number two?
Number two is, I think this tension that I struggle with all the time of, I don't like being salesy. I don't like feeling, well, first of all, I don't like feeling like I'm being sold to. Mm-hmm. I hate it when I feel like I'm in a funnel. You know how it is when you get you're getting the email drips, and you know that if I buy that thing, there's just going to be an upsell offer on the back end of it. And you feel like you're being worked over, and you're getting the Vaynerchuk jab, right hook. You're like, okay, I know the sell is coming because they're saying lots of nice things and they're offering things to me. And I just hate feeling like I'm a number in a giant machine for somebody. And it's very impersonal. And yet, to some degree, that's how business is done these days. And so, when I was mostly doing consulting, and especially lately, as I've been doing like executive coaching and leadership development stuff, a lot of that is sold very relationally.
Yes.
But then 2 years ago, I wrote and published a book and I can't sell books one at a time in relationship over a cup of coffee. Like that, the economics of that just don't really work out, right?
That's tough.
And
Yeah.
I'm working on this online course, and as I think about community and stuff, I want to be able to reach lots and lots of people, but I can't make all of that happen just purely organically and relationally. So there has to be some structure to it. And so I'm where I have in the past really resisted the sort of funnel style marketing programs and things like that. I'm now starting to look at, um, some of those options. How do I build systems of engagement for people for whom I have something to offer, who I can help,
Yeah.
and still retain my integrity and that sense of humanity that we just talked about, and not turn it into a series of transactions. I don't want to blanket 10,000 people and hope to get 10% of them to pay me thousands of dollars, and just make it a numbers game.
Right.
But I do want to have a lot of reach, and I do want
Yeah.
to have an impact with my content and the things that I've learned. And so I guess all that to say, Benj, is you asked what's on my mind. I've been wrestling with that tension between the process and the mechanisms of reaching people in a mass market without sort of selling my soul to the economic engine of looking at people as a number and trying to get as
Right.
many of them as possible.
Right. I can relate to absolutely everything you just said. Sales was like a dirty word for me in like
Yeah.
10, 15 years of my entrepreneurial career, until somebody said to me, Benj, do you like serving your clients? I'm like, heck yeah. Are you good at it? Yeah. Do you bring them value? Yeah. So sales is winning the opportunity to serve them. And I'm like,
Yes.
oh, well, I can do that. Right. And that changed my
Right.
mindset. But in the last
Right.
year and a half of building System and Soul, we've wrestled in the same tension, and probably still are to some degree, that you're talking about right now. And there were a couple times that we went a little too far down that road, and we all ended up kind of looking at each other going, this doesn't feel right. And I don't know if I think we knew it before we did it, but it was good advice, air quotes, right? So we kept going down that path, but we realized pretty quick, like, this isn't us. And so I don't
I'm
think
curious,
the tools and technology are bad. It's the way that you approach. It's all about what's in it, right?
Yeah. So I'd love to hear, how did you know when you felt like you were going too far, and then how did you dial that back and get to a comfortable spot?
I think the biggest red flag for us was when it felt a little bit like a bait and switch. Like we weren't being 100% honest with our intent, right?
Okay.
And so we wanted to be, but it just wasn't. And so we didn't, it's just that underlying, like, it was just something's off, right? Because our intent was off. We were saying one thing, but really we wanted to convert you down a funnel, right? Like we wanted, and that just was so, literally we used the word icky multiple times. It just felt icky. Like there was something icky. And then we figured out what it was, and we figured out a new way to do it. So that was for us, but I totally know what you mean. And it is hard because you can't not compete in a world where people are getting 50,000 unique messages a day, but you also don't want to add to the noise.
Yes.
And you do believe you have something valuable to offer them.
And here's the thing that I've recognized even about myself is, the way I want it to work is that I will, send my email newsletter a message one time about something I have available. And if they're interested, they'll respond. And if they're not, they won't.
Yes.
And yet I have been that guy who on the 7th email from someone went, I probably should do that.
Right.
And then I bought into something, I made a purchase or signed up for something, or, because I was distracted or I just neglected, or I kept saying, yeah, I'll get to that. And it took a few reminders, and I have to remind myself that even I need reminders and need follow-up in order to make a good decision sometimes, and not feel guilty about telling people 3, 4, 5 times that I have an opportunity for you that I think could be really helpful for you if you want it.
Yeah. Yeah. I like when the personalization of this whole conversation is interesting too. And it depends on what you're selling. If you need to sell 2 units or 10 units is different than 10,000 units. But um, if somebody's reaching out and it's like they did the 30-second skim of the website to give you the one compliment to know that it was personalized, that's
Right.
worse than it being generic to me.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
if it's
Yes.
truly personalized, like I'll give them a slow clap. But if it's that like fake, that is that's the highest cringe value to me right now.
It is. The name of my company is the Kelso Group, and I don't use that really anywhere. It's the name of my LLC. It's on my LinkedIn because I've had it for years and years, but it's, like that's not my brand. But I will get messages from people, usually through like LinkedIn, that will say, "Hey, I see the work you're doing at the Kelso Group, and it just looks like you guys are crushing it. And I love what you guys are doing over there." And it's so obviously just an attempt to, get a foot in the door and start a conversation. And usually I just ignore those when they're obvious, but I'm so tempted to say, what specifically about the work that we're doing are you impressed by? Like to ask, to probe for a question, but of course then I know I'd just be starting a conversation with someone who just wants to sell me something. So that
you didn't want to be in the conversation.
Yeah.
What happens is you send that reply, and the next day you get the next email in their sequence that has nothing to do with what
that has nothing to do with the reply. Yeah. Or it totally ignores the response that I sent. Yes.
Well, here's the thing, like as you navigate this tension, and because I know you, like as you're out speaking, there has to be some way that they have the ability the next time you have something to offer them. Right. Because you've already given them something. That guy that came up to you and said, this is why I'm at this conference. I need to hear this thing. And you're going to have more of those. Kris isn't a one-hit wonder. So he's going to need to hear the next thing. So how do you honor him by giving him the availability to see the next thing and maybe remind him a couple times?
Yeah.
Without turning into the cringe factor.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is the challenge. And I think I'm getting there, but it's an ongoing tension. And I like that, sort of the way you described it, as nebulous as it was, that you felt icky about, where you had gotten to. And I think the real challenge is just to make sure that you always maintain that icky sensor, that you don't ever wear that down to the point that you don't feel icky anymore, or
delegate it to somebody who doesn't have it.
Yeah, well, that's a really good point too. Is the temptation for somebody like me is to hand off all my marketing to someone who's really good at marketing,
right?
So that I don't have to do it. But if they don't have the same sort of standards of humanity and the personalness of it that I do, that part could be lost, and it could get icky without me even realizing it. So,
for sure. What's the third thing on your mind today?
One of the big ahas that I had when I wrote this book is I did a lot of reflection back on my career. So I was trying to figure out, when was I experiencing imposter syndrome and what was happening and what are the lessons that I've learned. And I started to notice this pattern that the times in my life, the times in my career, especially when I felt the most insecure, the most in over my head, when I was experiencing that feeling of imposter syndrome the strongest, those were the most pivotal moments of my career. That was usually when something amazing was happening, right? Because I was stretching myself. Mm-hmm. I was outside my comfort zone. I was surrounded by people who intimidated me, but maybe from whom I had a lot to learn, or, could benefit from being in their company. And so I realized that I had moments where I could either sort of draw back in fear, or I could push through the insecurity and accomplish something.
Yeah.
And so the result of that awareness, I mean, whether I ever published the book or not, this was the huge takeaway for me from the process of writing the book and sort of studying this topic, was that when I feel in over my head, when I feel that imposter syndrome feeling, that inner critic, that's a sign that I'm on the verge of something great. And I need to see that as a positive sign, not a negative one.
Yeah.
And so now I'm using that as a guidepost. If I'm not feeling insecure, then I'm probably not taking enough risk.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm really comfortable in everything that I'm doing in my career, I feel like I've got it on lock and it's all going great, then am I really pushing myself? And how long before I start to slide backwards instead of moving forwards? But on the other hand, if there's some area where I'm out of my element, I'm insecure, I'm feeling like I'm exposed a little bit and I'm at risk, that is a good sign, and I need to lean into that. So now when I get that feeling, I look around, I say, what's my learning opportunity? What am I doing? Who am I with, and how can they potentially benefit me, or I can benefit them? How can we grow these relationships rather than withdraw from them? And so I see it as a positive sign, and I'm a lot more aware to watch for that and actually anticipate it, and even get a little bit excited about it now when that happens.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I even I'll draw this back to your vulnerability conversation, was last Friday I did a webinar, and I did part of a webinar, and I was presenting, first of all, pretty big crowd, more than I'm used to. Second of all, I was getting way more vulnerable. I can teach on, here's the principles and the mental models and whatever, no problem. But I was getting, this was my story, and there was some vulnerability to it. And there were a couple principles in there that are really hard for me to articulate. And so afterwards, I was asking my friend, I was like, did that even make sense? Because you never know how it goes on the other side of you for something like that. You walk in, your wife was like, how is it? And I'm like, I don't know. No idea. But so I'm asking my friend who was there, and I'm like, did any of that make sense? How could I have explained that better? And he paused for a long time, and he said, I've found that anytime we're wading into vulnerability, we're at the edge of our own understanding. And so it's just messy. And so if I had been able to package that well in that moment, it probably would have only been because I was on the other side of it. Therefore it was knowledge and wisdom, but not the experiencing the messiness, the vulnerability, the growth of it in that moment. I just thought that was such a great picture. Because we want everything to be so well packaged, including ourselves, going back to, us in the meeting with all the other entrepreneurs, like we package ourselves. But there's so much, if we're pushing ourselves, if we're outside our comfort zone, like you're saying, then we're experiencing the messiness of, we're up against something, we're coming up against something we don't fully understand. We're starting to get it, starting to process it, starting to figure it out, but I don't even fully understand all this myself.
That's really interesting. I love the way you put that. And it reminds me of something I heard Brene Brown talk about. Of course, she talks a lot about vulnerability. And she was addressing a question of, is it possible to be too vulnerable? Or when is it inappropriate to be vulnerable? And her answer basically was, if you're getting vulnerable about something where if the purpose of the vulnerability is really that it's cathartic for you and it's not beneficial to anyone else around you, then that's a selfish vulnerability and it's probably inappropriate.
Yes.
But if it's valuable to the other people, then go there, then do it for them. Right. And what I hear you saying, the way I'm connecting the dots here is, if whatever you're being vulnerable about is so fresh and so near that you can't even articulate it, that you can't go there, then it's not going to be beneficial to anyone.
Yeah.
But if you're so far from it that it's really not that vulnerable anymore, like it's just an old story that you tell that's just funny, then it may not be all that helpful either. It might be helpful, but it's It's just like, that's really easy and safe. And so what you're describing is kind of in the middle. It's
Yeah.
that time period or that space where you can be articulate enough because you're just really starting to draw the lessons out of your situation or your struggle. And you can share that and help other people with it, even though you
Yeah.
haven't fully baked it all. You haven't
Right.
figured it all out enough to make it this very finely tuned presentation.
Yeah.
But that's sort of the sweet spot, right? Is
It
when
is.
you really are just being genuine in the moment. And this is what I'm learning right now. Those are some of the best lessons, is when someone shares, this is what I'm learning right now. It's not, this is what I need to learn. This is what I don't know. This is what I don't
Right.
understand. That's not helpful. But neither is it, this is something I conquered years ago, and let me just tell you, and it's a piece of cake. And that's often not that helpful
That's
either. But
what
that sweet
makes this
spot of, this is where I'm at. Yeah.
That's what makes this podcast so fun to me. It's like, what's on your mind? What are you thinking about? What are you
What are you
processing? What are you
working
trying to
through
figure
right
out?
now?
You know, if it was like, hey, Kris, what are you an expert at? You know, boring. I'll go watch your TED talk. Like,
Right.
you know, like we can get
Yes.
that. But
Yes.
I've got a fun little clever saying my coach taught me for exactly what you were saying. Is it anxiety relieving or goal achieving? Anxiety
Ooh,
relieving or goal
yes.
achieving? I love that. The other thing that you made me think about is we've learned to have an expression in our household. We have 4 young children, where they're up against, you know, we just say, I'm feeling some sort of way. Like, I don't know how I'm feeling yet. I haven't even gotten to what I'm experiencing or what I'm feeling, but in this moment, I'm feeling some sort of way. And that's kind of just like a moment of like, okay, let's pause, let's explore and get into the depths of that. So, hey, Kris, we're out of time, man. This was so much fun. We might have to do a round 2. Maybe we'll do a live meetup some point. That'd be super fun. But thank you so much. Tell everybody where to go get the book or hire you to come speak for them.
Yeah, I'm easy to find online if you remember that my name starts with a K, K-R-I-S, Kelso, Kelso. I'm at kriskelso.com. I'm Kris Kelso on Twitter, on LinkedIn. I'm the Kris Kelso on Facebook or Instagram. And you can find the book specifically at overcomingtheimpostor.com. But it's also available anywhere books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Your local bookstores can order it if they don't have it in stock. It's pretty widely available. And the audiobook just came out in mid-October as well. So there's an audiobook version read by yours truly, the author. And that was a lot of fun.
Yes, to be recognized by cashiers everywhere.
That's right. So someone can hear my voice and say, ooh, I didn't even think about the fact that might happen again. Here we go.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
Benj, this has been so much fun. Thanks for having me, man.
Yep.